Okay, so when a global crisis hits and shipping lanes get disrupted, you totally expect fuel prices to go up, right? But there's a really weird mystery hiding in the numbers. It turns out, not all fuels panic in the same way. So let's dive in and figure out why the absolute lifeblood of our economy, diesel, is on such a fragile lifeline.
And this question, it really cuts right to the heart of how our entire modern world functions. I mean, we all feel the pain at the pump when gasoline prices go up for our cars. But why is it that the fuel that powers almost every single truck, train, and ship, the very fuel that brings you, well, everything you buy, why does that one get hit so much harder?
And look, the numbers do not lie. Check this out. In the US, a recent crisis pushed gasoline prices up by about 20%. Painful, for sure, but diesel, it shot up a staggering 28%. Now, that extra 8% might not sound like a huge deal, but when you're talking about the fuel that moves 70% of all our stuff, it sends a massive shockwave through the entire economy. So what on earth is going on?
Well, it's not just one single thing. It's more like a perfect storm of factors that makes diesel uniquely vulnerable. Let's break down the 4 key reasons behind this crazy price spike.
First up, refinery geography. The US refines most of its own gasoline, which is great, but Europe, they're heavily dependent on diesel imports straight from the Middle East, so a disruption over there hits the global diesel market directly. Second, inventories were already super low before the crisis even started, so there was just no buffer. Third, and this one is absolutely crucial, you have what's called inelastic demand. That's really just a fancy way of saying demand doesn't drop, even when prices go through the roof. You and I can decide to skip a road trip, right? But a shipping company can't just decide to park its entire fleet of trucks. The goods have to move. And fourth, the jet fuel connection. See, jet fuel and diesel are basically chemical cousins, made in the same part of the refinery. So when airlines have to reroute flights around a conflict zone, they burn way more fuel, creating a direct competition for the exact same stuff.
And this really just nails the point about that inelastic demand. As Patrick DeHaan from Gas Buddy puts it, the economy simply can't stop using diesel. The trucks have to roll, the trains have to run, no matter what it costs. And that reality creates a bidding war that sends prices soaring way more dramatically than they ever do for gasoline.
So if petroleum-based diesel is this vulnerable, what are the alternatives? Well, funnily enough, the simplest idea is also the oldest one, and it's suddenly getting a new sense of urgency. Now this is what's so wild. We're actually talking about going right back to the very beginning. Get this. Rudolf Diesel himself, the guy who invented the engine, he never intended for it to run on petroleum. His original engine from the 1890s, it was designed to run on peanut oil. The only reason we switched to petroleum was because it was cheaper. And this brings us to a genuinely interesting asymmetry in the fuel world. Making a diesel substitute from plants is surprisingly easy. Seriously, the process to make biodiesel is often compared to brewing beer. But making a gasoline substitute? Whoa, that's a whole different animal. That requires complex industrial processes. There's no simple pour some cooking oil in your Honda option. But here is the massive catch: scale. While biodiesel is a fantastic buffer, the US consumes over 40 billion gallons of diesel every single year. Even if we completely maxed out our agricultural capacity, we could only produce maybe 10 billion gallons of biodiesel. It's a really meaningful piece of the puzzle, but it can't solve the whole problem on its own. Okay, so if simple biodiesel has a scale problem, what about more advanced biofuels? For that, let's jump over to a real-world test case. See, Sweden went all in on a sophisticated diesel alternative, and it created a fascinating and kind of cautionary tale. They bet big on something called HVO, which stands for hydrotreated vegetable oil. You can just think of it as a premium next-generation biodiesel. It's a drop-in fuel, which means you can literally pump HVO 100, that's 100% biofuel, straight into any standard diesel engine without any modifications. Sweden actually built this huge network of pumps, which was a major achievement. And they backed this up with some seriously aggressive government policy. In 2023, there was a mandate that diesel sold in Sweden had to cut greenhouse gas emissions by over 30%. But then a new government came in and completely reversed course, slashing that mandate all the way down to just 6% for 2024, because the higher mandate was making fuel more expensive at the pump. And the effect? It was immediate, and it was absolutely brutal. HVO deliveries plummeted by 95% year on year. A thriving new industry was basically crippled overnight, not because the technology failed, but because the political winds changed. So here's the crucial question. Even if that policy had stayed in place,
Does having a domestic biofuel supply actually protect you from a global oil price shock that starts in the Middle East?
And the answer is, well, it's complicated. It's kind of a yes-but situation. On the one hand, yes, HBO is made from things like used cooking oil and animal fats, and none of that stuff has to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. So for physical supply security, that's great. But, and it's a big but, the prices for those raw materials, they're set on the global market. When oil prices spike, demand for vegetable oils as a substitute also spikes, which drives up the price of everything you need to make HVO. So while the supply chain is separate, the price, unfortunately, is not.
All right, so if biofuels run into problems with scale and policy, what about a much more high-tech route? Let's look at the most advanced, but also the most mind-bogglingly expensive way to create synthetic diesel.
It's a process called gas-to-liquids, or GTL. The chemistry here is totally solid. You take natural gas, methane, and you put it through this incredible process that basically reassembles the molecules into longer hydrocarbon chains. The result is an unbelievably pure, high-performance synthetic diesel. It's actually better than the stuff we get from crude oil.
So why isn't this stuff everywhere? Well, let me just give you one very simple, very, very large number. The cost to build just a single large-scale GTL plant is about $19 billion. Yeah, that staggering price tag means these plants only make economic sense when there's a massive price gap between oil and natural gas. It's why the world's biggest GTL plant is in Qatar, which is famous for its super cheap gas. For pretty much the rest of the world, the numbers just don't add up. So when we put all these pieces together, a really clear picture starts to emerge. The problem isn't the science, not at all. The real fight here is between chemistry and cold, hard reality.
This table sums it up perfectly. For every one of these alternatives, the chemistry is ready to go. The technology is established, but each one runs headfirst into a massive real-world bottleneck. For simple biodiesel, it's about agricultural scale. For advanced HVO, as we saw in Sweden, it's about policy stability. And for the high-tech GTL, it's all about that astronomical cost.
And this brings us to the central irony of this entire story. The fuel that gets slammed the hardest in a crisis, the one that's most vulnerable to these global shocks, is also the one that has the most chemically proven, ready-to-go replacement options available. Which really just leaves us with one final thought. The science to solve diesel's fragile lifeline problem? It's already here. The bottlenecks are not in the lab. They're on our farms, in our governments, and in our corporate boardrooms. So the real question isn't whether we can replace diesel, it's whether we have the collective will to actually overcome the very real challenges of scale, policy, and cost.